Well, let's set the stage for MyEssentials. This was your first project of software, working on software development
Yes.
and design at Troy Web. Yes. I remember when I was talking internally about bringing a designer to help me on MyEssentials, and you came to mind, and I was like, oh my God. So I saw your work on Caring Gene and how beautiful it was and had a lot of design impact. So I was really excited to bring you in on this and see how your design eye and your aesthetic would impact a software application that needed a lot of love. And so happy with how it's developed and come together for sure. So I'm really curious from your perspective, and now that you're with us full time, still having a bit of a foot, like a different perspective, seeing a little bit outside and inside at the same time. What was it like for you coming into this project with kind of a bird's eye view of all the things that were in play and orienting yourself in there?
Yeah, it was amazing to see all the prep work that was there. I think it's like a very privileged way to come into a project where the actual product is done and developed and being used. So I get the opportunity to come in and just kind of edit things down and make things a little simpler where I can. The project seemed ready for a redesign. It seemed ready to get a little love, a little polish, because the dev was really the priority at first, just getting all the features in place. And now it seemed like the time to start reflecting the brand a bit more, to clean up the systems, make it a better kind of user experience. So being able to kind of jump into a Figma file and see all the screens at once and start understanding the flows made it super easy to get a sense of like what could be improved, what could be grouped together, and where we could take things.
Awesome. Yep. And that leads into the first question that I had there about the screen audit, which is what was the first thing when you noticed when you opened up the old platform or the screens? I'll share my screen so we can look at it and talk to it.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed was that it didn't have a ton of like brand elements going on with it for a branded platform, which is the case with a lot of internal software and stuff like that. So it seemed like there's a lot of opportunity to really make some worthwhile improvements to start getting the MyEssentials brand in there, the logo, the colors. It seemed very simple to start, which is great. Always nice to have that kind of like backbone to build up on. But yeah, it felt like there was a lot of clicks to kind of get through the different actions. Everything was kind of organized around tables, which is in some cases really great, and others can feel a little daunting. The biggest kind of thing that I noticed across all these screens was just there's a lot of overwhelming information. Maybe not this particular table in mind, but just having tables and rows that would then expand upon themselves with multiple actions available and headings, and trying to orient yourself in this system can be a bit of a challenge just to know how deep you are. Yeah. So in thinking about like a redesign, I was curious, how can we make it a little bit clearer where someone is in the system? How can we better present information without feeling overwhelmed? And how can we start to move away from this table-based design and just something with a little more variety, something with a little bit easier to kind of sink your teeth into?
Yeah. Even from the user feedback session that Kevin and I went on last year was so front of mind, looking at, laying down the screen inventory here in Figma and getting that kind of like high level overview of the patterns and how the lack of patterns and the lack of UI consistency between some of the things that were happening. As you mentioned, really designed by developers for a reason because of the speed that was needed on the project and things like that initially. And now that it's in a state that's ready both from a user perspective and a stakeholder perspective for something that's more mature and modernized. It was very interesting to lay down these screenshots and really see how not unified the experience was, minus the table-based system, like you mentioned. That was like the most unifying structure, I feel like, from a UI perspective here.
Right. It's funny. software projects and website projects, they can feel a bit sprawling, where you design a couple templates at first and then a need comes up where you make one modification that takes you in one direction and then another comes up taking you in another direction. It's really like the perfect opportunity to get brought in at this point where we can look at kind of the whole slate of we've been moving in these different kind of directions, different types of flows. Now that we have them all laid out, is there efficiencies we can create? Can we start to refactor some of these things?
Yeah. Something that really struck me talking to the users who live in this system full time, 8 hours a day, and really know its issues and the things they do like about it, the things that they're used to, and the things that they were like greatly desiring change around. This screen we're looking at here for admin actions is really the heart of the way that they manage customers when they call in. So the main user persona we were addressing in this phase of work, really scoping the redesign around the customer service representatives or CSRs and the way they manage the customer accounts related to calls they make or receive around hearing aid insurance and ensuring the hearing aids that customers have and things that need to change around their accounts, renewals, what's the status of their account, if it needs to be suspended, notifications, things like policies and batteries, linking out to third-party systems related to billing and things like that. But to really readdress the redesign and start to create a design system, which is like a new thing for Troy Web, out of basically this main screen that we're looking at right here from the skeleton of this, and knowing that there's some things the users did like to see all at a glance, and mostly it was causing a lot of pain for them. So when you looked at this from a design perspective, what were the main points that you wanted to elevate out of here? And I can even share kind of my initial pass on the light touch redesign that I did last year to pick up some of those ideas too.
Yeah, and I think that light touch pass definitely improved on this. I think what sticks out is just there's a lot of underutilized space and at the same time, a lot of information all in one screen. And it's funny working with clients that have gotten used to a website. There's a bit of like familiarity bias where they've gone through the efforts of memorizing, oh, that's how I do this thing. So I want to keep doing it that way because I've built in the muscle memory of getting it done. There was just a lot of information on this screen and a lot of actions being performed that this screen felt like it was serving just too many purposes all in one. And that can be something that the client really values because they are so familiar with how things work that they want to keep things all in one click or all in one screen. But at the same time, it creates this problem like I see here, where there's not really a clear hierarchy of information. There's a lot of underutilized space. There's not a clear differentiation between all the different actions available to you here. That just by creating a little bit more visual hierarchy, some changes in scale, some stronger contrast, like the fundamental, design characteristics, it could really make the experience easier to scan and navigate without having a huge overhead of learning a brand new system. I think that's really the directive that we brought into this project, was trying to figure out how can we make things more intuitive rather than changing behaviors that have been already learned. So it's not a matter of like, I need to learn this brand new system and this brand new way of doing things. That sounds scary and anxiety inducing. It's actually, we're going to make it more reflective of how you would want this to be used in the first place. So it's not learning a new system. It's trying to get you to have an experience that you would already expect.
Yes. I love the way you said that, because it's like elevating what's kind of intuitively driven by the user, the CSRs as we're talking about, where you would almost expect certain things to happen in the order of the flow, and they don't right now, or they didn't in the legacy system. And it's great to be able to sort of peek into the minds and the psychology of what they're really looking for. And that did come through their feedback, and the urgency of what they were saying wasn't working for them. So there's there's something in the admin actions to say like at a meta level or a philosophical level, the user needs to be able to go to a screen and have the ability to manage things and go off into not necessarily flows, but have feature level access to do things in one place. And it's our job to organize that in a way that makes sense visually. I like how you mentioned through contrast and hierarchically, whatever that word is, that they could see the order of information is going to make sense to them and is already kind of pre-ordered, so they don't have to scan a lot of text or read through a lot of things to get to the one piece of information that they need. And also be able to have links where expected and needed, the ability to copy things easily, the ability to manage content and information right where they are rather than going down a flow or specified like clicks away from where they are. And just to know that the design that we've spec'd out is really empowering them to be able to do that and not have to, in their experience, kind of travel through the software to do that. There are things that the UI actually serves them right where they are. And that feels really good. As much as the admin actions is legacy, it did have a bit of that where, you know, that sort of like drop down overlay of the drawer is like the old version of the drawer that we came up with that is
Yeah.
the modern version of. Yeah, which is funny. This is, so I'm showing this kind of light slash medium touch in progress version of what I did last year when the scope was a light or a medium touch redesign of admin actions to start to reorganize and categorize that information visually, but without a major design budget, but start to figure out where we want to bring in improved user experience and functions. And this was one where it's starting to componentize these different policy level things related to the equipment that the customer has and get some colors in there, have statuses up at the top. And this was an earlier version that still had notes, but the legacy version had a very, very tiny UI element for notes that was literally just like this one section that was an expandable text box, but it didn't expand very much. And then this one is a sort of another one in progress that kind of a little bit of a legacy header up here, but started to bring in the idea of having notes integrated with this sidebar area and add the ability to add and edit notes right here. It's more real estate kind of for the screen level engagement that a user does need. That's what we found from the user feedback, that they needed a more robust system to support the notes that they make on the customer's account, because that's one of their primary activities that they do to track information around changing a customer's account. So I just wanted to show this as a sort of progress benchmark for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can definitely see how information is taking up more dedicated space. Things are being grouped and visually separated from one another. So you can already see like the progression from the previous version to this is going in that right place of, you know, organizing information and making it clearer where things belong. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face when designing software is there's this mentality of, because it's an internal program that is getting used by high efficiency users all the time, there's this notion that you need everything everywhere all at once. When really, I think it's our job to kind of say, not everything everywhere all at once, but everything within reach. So we're not trying to take away functionality, but trying to organize how you actually get through your job.
Yes. And even just this sort of basic level of like collapsing things that are no longer needed or pertinent is such a low hanging fruit thing, but they didn't have that in the system, in the legacy system, that everything was out front all the time. And there wasn't an organization of information present to the CSR to say, here's what you should look at first, and maybe you need this later. And I like the way you said that, because it's not that we just need everything to show them everything all the time, everywhere. It's like to just give them a digestion of what feels like the most intuitive path for them to take through their process. It's really satisfying to be able to offer that. Let me jump back into our redesign file.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so here we are. So when we were redesigning the front end, we were also, and we'll talk to this, the redesign decisions that you made and we, could iterated on together for sure too. And at the same time started to architect out a design system to support the scalability of the different levels that are coming through this redesign, identifying the UI components that were going to be repeatable and change information, but some of the things like the cards and you know the feature level, the functionality aspects, definitely we still have grids or tables in here, but it's a refreshed look. And then statuses, identifying what's going to remain when a CSR starts drilling down into the certain things that need to happen from screen to screen. So talk to me a little bit about some of your decisions that you made in this design, and then we'll start touching on some of the design system stuff.
Yeah, I think having that freedom to kind of start from the ground up allowed a certain level of polish to get baked in from the beginning. Just knowing that we were going to play with different types of fonts and colors and start incorporating that allowed it to kind of accelerate towards that look. Not that you should always start from this kind of like medium high fidelity to begin with, but I think we had enough groundwork to kind of push us towards this information. I mean, I think they're really just evolutions on the things that you started in your light touch design, like the activity panel on the right. It's very similar to how we would show all activity versus notes and versus customer actions. It's just trying to create like a bit more of a visual hierarchy with, we have these two columns on the right hand side that are a bit pushed back visually with their gray backgrounds to organize them almost into kind of like a bento box kind of feel where everything has their own little compartment. And note from a high level view of the overall system, it was clear that all of these actions that were taking place on the screen related back to a particular customer at a given time. So knowing that the people using the system would often have to refer back to customer information and all the information that they were drilling down into was related back to it. It became clear that we should have that be kind of a static, fixed column to help both keep things, within arm's reach in terms of getting back information, but also to orient the user and let them know we're still talking about this particular customer. No matter how deep we get in the system, we're still always focused around this one primary user. And knowing that this is going to be a bit more of a software kind of feel, an app feel rather than a website, it allowed us to kind of make kind of architecture decisions that would feel more akin to an app. Having kind of panels and static sidebars and things like that, and a navigation on the left-hand side that would stay fixed. Yeah, it started to make sense to keep some of these things in the places where they are. And I think really the design system kind of grew out from itself. There's a lot of approaches to building a design system. A lot of people like to have, a foundation or a base that they start from and then modify. I like to think that, if you're going to be agile about this and you're going to try and build something bespoke, it's better to kind of build the components you need as you need them rather than over design from the beginning. So really, I'd like to just build design systems as I go, capturing the variables that make sense, capturing the design decisions like fonts and sizes and colors and spacing just as we go so that there's a record so that we can keep referring back to them rather than handpicking values left and right. And really, the more that you do that and the more that you solve problems, the design system kind of builds itself. I think the most challenging part of design systems, and conversely the most fun part of design systems, is how they allow designers to express logical decision making in ways that you don't get from just putting things on the canvas. Like, as soon as I start thinking, I want backgrounds to be a particular color, I don't have to remember this is my style or this is the particular color I'm using. I can create a variable that unites all of them together. And I can then make variations on that get referenced through different parts of the design and backwards and forwards. So it allows me to think a bit more like a developer and how these different elements of a design are connected together and respond to each other in ways that if I were building this in another program or in a variable lists program, I just wouldn't be able to kind of capture that level of thinking.
Yeah, so it's a kind of abstraction that happens away
100%.
from the sort of visualization of what we're looking at on the screen where you can move things around and, recombine them, and you don't necessarily have to abide by the rules of development or code specific limitations or parameters in that. But then we take a design and say, these are the rules around them. These are the parameters we're creating, and saying, these are the tokens or the variables that govern those practices and when and why they're used.
Yeah. Yeah. And before, when you would build something like this in Illustrator or Photoshop or some other design program, you kind of had to keep all that logic stored in your brain, versus now you have a method of at least expressing that logic in the design program itself so that you can start building those connections.
Yeah. What we ended up kind of sectioning off the core ideas in this and fleshing them out from this other screen here, the medium redesign or upgrade. This section being what became the left side kind of sticky sidebar component. And then these aspects of these elements were coming into the middle as components that could be managed by the CSR for or on behalf of the customer. And these would be like the ones that were like further in once you're drilling down into that specific panel to know more about this policy, then you would see the things that were not the most timeline relevant for this specific customer, but still accessible. So we're really getting that hierarchy breakdown that wasn't present in the initial design for sure. And then the same thing with the ability to take action on behalf of the customer's account and kind of making sure that these are pretty close to their fingertips and manageable within reach, as in fewer clicks, 1 or 2 clicks. And then this is again the base of the more fleshed out notes version that is here with things like the WYSIWYG. What you
Mm.
see is what you get, a medium level, a more visual editor of the text notes that a user can have, which we have here. Yes, that became the drawer. And, to have the ability, let's see, maybe it's not here on the screen, but to add some rich text elements, but not too much, just enough to be able to have some styling or perhaps bold or italic or like a bulleted list or something like that. It's really going to improve quality of life
Yeah.
for them to be able to call out certain things here. And, some of these really great elements that they got really excited about from our reviews with them and the feedback about just being able to copy some of these bits of information because they were either writing them down on the side or copying and pasting by selecting. And how many clicks does that add? Like a lot. And this is such a great example of our work with the redesign and even collaborating with the developers on this project, that we had more of a small flyout menu, we had a bigger flyout menu, and then it became this drawer. So let's talk about the evolution of this kind of big, robust notes drawer and the drawer that kind of took over the editability for many levels of information for the CS.
Drawer that demanded to be created.
Yes.
Yeah,
It needed to come into being.
right. It manifested itself.
Yes.
It just became a matter of weighing these two balancing these two opposing ideas of like, we want to have a lot of information and a lot of functionality within the screen, but we're limited by the amount of screen space we actually have. And excusing the potential for super large monitors, I think a lot of the users, the average users on a standard, 20 something inch screen or probably less than that. So we had a very finite amount of space to use, and it became clear that the users wanted to still see information, be able to reference it in the notes that they were creating. So we didn't want to put that to a separate page. We wanted it to kind of show up on the same page. But as we iterated, having it exist alongside all that information just squeezed the amount of space we had available and made it really difficult to still be legible, still afford the amount of space that, this text demanded. So we came up with the idea of the drawer, as we'd seen in a number of other, digital products. And it just became a great way to overlay information without hiding it. And it started to develop this notion that throughout this system, if you're editing information, it's going to pop up in the drawer. So not only are we editing notes or the specific details of a particular payment or customer, no matter what gets edited, it's going to try and get pushed into that door as a dedicated place so that the users will start to create expectations and behaviors around what they think will happen when they go to start editing. So when we say it kind of manifested itself, it's true. We needed more space. We needed things to be visible and referenceable. Yeah, like this previous design, we had it occupying the right-hand sidebar, and it just wasn't enough space to keep presenting everything all in one screen. And we knew that if on smaller screens, it was going to be even tighter for space. So rather than try and redesign the entire system to accommodate smaller and smaller screens, it became clear that we should just have it be an overlay that can still reference the most vital information without compromising too much functionality.
Yeah, and I love too how it really evolved, even though the color shift of the notes kind of overlay flyout was nice. Distinction of saying, like, because of this contrast, pay attention to this UI element. This has a greater level of dimension and it feels much bigger, as in closer to my depth perception as a user. So I can immediately say, I need to focus right here. And I'm also given a lot more real estate to do that and drill down into it instead of keeping it tight into what we established with the left sticky sidebar, which persists.
Yeah.
Even if you go through and click on some of these other elements and move into further and further depths of the expandable panels and things like that, like this is payments, things related to payments, missed and failed, upcoming and past, you can then manage what's going on in this specific state while I'm sort of on pause with all the things that are already in front of me, and kind of going back to what you said initially about like not everything everywhere all at once immediately in my face and I can't figure out where to go kind of thing. If we say like this is a much bigger level of real estate and I have some depth perception created around it, it's saying like focus in on this information. It's nice and big, you can't miss it. There's this sort of grayed out background going on here that's saying this is still here, you can look at it, but focus in to get this specific information set and ready, and then you can go back to what you were doing. It really does feel like bringing in that intuitive way that human beings work, as opposed to asking people to still kind of scan very small text and maybe icons in a table-based format to find things that are hidden and not prioritized. So I love where we ended up with the greater level of visual emphasis on the thing that is, to a great degree, one of the most important elements of this software system for the users. And we brought it forward visually to make it scale-wise feel much bigger, for them, and elevate it in terms of its importance visually, which was really satisfying.
And like, one other thing that's interesting is it kind of solves the problem of serving the purpose of a whole separate page while not necessarily feeling that way. Like, because you can see everything in the background, you feel as if you're still on that same page. But technically, all that functionality is locked behind the overlay. So you might as well be on a new page, but it doesn't feel as jarring as really making that full disconnect and having everything reload and take over that prominence. But that is something we kind of needed to do at the same time. So it's a nice, clever little device to solve a lot of problems all at once.
And the flows, and again, the sort of main feedback, one of the main points of feedback from the CSRs from our on-site, when Kevin and I actually observed them working in the legacy system, the CSRs, and seeing them kind of flow through different parts of the program or the application. And it did feel like a flow when you were actually going down tracks of saying, I need to open this modal. And sometimes the button was on the left or the right side. It didn't have sort of a unified structure of saying, always expect the buttons here. And now in this design update, we have solved for that by saying, expect the left sidebar of the most important information about this customer to be available to you on the left side always and for all time. And also to have the ability to edit in this expandable panel that you can prioritize and focus in on when you need it, and it will go away when you don't need it. And we've set that pattern for them really kind of psychologically. And I think that's going to be such a cognitive burden relieved from their practice of working in the MyEssentials application that I just can't wait to see how it feels to them once they're in here and moving through this new system, how it will actually empower them to work more efficiently and feel a lot better, feel cared for, I feel like.
Yeah. And I think one of the other really significant results of this process was just hearing their reaction when they saw the comparison of where they came from with the previous design to this newer design. Not only were they like excited to see themselves in a different light, in a more polished light, but it got them really excited to use the platform. And I think that's kind of the unspoken value of design a bit, where it can create this kind of energy and momentum within your client to want to get more invested in their product and their experience. So that was like a huge unexpected win that I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I care a lot about the user's experience in these applications that we work on. If we can relieve even a little bit of pain, even better if it's more pain. But this system never had the design, like a design budget or design pass, a design, detail, but also having that grounded in a base of research that had to do with the users, real feedback. And really, it could only have come in the last kind of year or two now that we're in 2025 without knowing their experience. And we have this client for several years now, but it was really driven by the client, the need to make some change around that. They were really ready to see that. And so were the CSRs. So the sort of passion around what you're saying was so present and so there that Kevin and I were just there to kind of scoop it up and to kind of channel it in the place that it needed to go. And then you were in the right place at the right time and with the right skills and all that stuff. From a design perspective, to come in and say, all right, like you were saying, from the ground up, having access to the legacy system, knowing some ideas that I had put in place and discussions that we had around how are we going to redesign or do this sort of upgrade around design for them to really create that not only a business impact and the goals for where the stakeholders want to take MyEssentials, but improve the quality of life. That's the phrase that the stakeholders used. And to me, that's just such music to my ears because, if we can make their jobs and their lives easier, it's really magical from a designer's perspective that not only do we hear you, but we can help you. And it does have to do with moving things around and making them look better and all that stuff. But what it actually does is it structures things in a way that makes things accessible so that they can see and do and hear and be seen and function. And that has to do with colors. It has to do with text size. It has to do with these decisions around icons and the colors associated with them, because they're recognizing the work that they have to do through those, like paying attention to their reality in the system. It's not just sort of dumping them in there and being like, good luck finding that column in that table. Like we actually thought about them in this to a
Yeah.
great degree. And I feel that your empathy towards the users in your design and our design together. So I'm going to jump to this design system file, which is where we have pulled the components that were kind of really built and scoped alongside the design upgrade that we were just looking at in this other Figma file. This is now the design system Figma file that we have architected out to support the next level of, well, it's to document the components as built and designed, but also to be able to build up from these as a base to solve for the other flows that are needed in the other user personas beyond CSR. The rules associated with those visual and component level elements that the developers can then run with, so that we don't have to have the most massive budget to solve for every design problem for the software application, but it supports the scaling of that and empowers the developers to meet the needs of the growing business.
Yeah, it's really about creating a toolkit so that as ideas get presented, whether from the client side or from the service side, there's enough groundwork that they can be rapidly iterated on without needing a huge design budget or a huge time commitment. So this is all in the effort to speed up production and promote creativity.
Let me see if I can find the primitives. Are they in here?
The primitives are that first. The elements are the primitives.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're a little dressed up, but these are the
Okay, yeah.
the basic building blocks of this system.
All right, so Jake, talk about how you architected out the documentation for this design system, the design system in progress, and to really start empowering Connor specifically, who's working on the components for this. But talk a bit about, the primitives here and the semantics. Talk about, because we mentioned abstraction as it relates to taking the visuals into this abstract hierarchy of more code level thinking, more developer driven thinking to architect out these as components in a software application. So how do we go from the visual design to a design system thinking, like what we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think the more that we started designing the individual elements of the MyEssentials platform, there was a structure to how certain elements of the design were made. There were patterns, there were scaling systems. For example, the radius of the corners of some of our elements followed a pattern of doubling or some sort of set ratio from one step to the other. And as we started to build out the system, not just for corners, but for spacing and for typography and colors and stuff like that, we knew that we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into fixed values. We knew we still wanted the opportunity to be creative and to experiment with different ideas while still maintaining that logic of how all these things would interconnect and form relationships with each other. So there's a concept when you're building design systems of dividing your variables into primitive tokens and semantic tokens. Primitive being just kind of the raw values you would use, like 2 pixels or 12 pixels or this particular blue or this particular font. And semantic values being the representative of how we connect those raw values to particular design logic. For example, we have our default text colors, we have secondary text colors, we have the inverse of that for when we're putting things on dark backgrounds. We don't necessarily want to get ourselves fixed to one particular color so much as we want to say we have a set variable for this type of color. So we can start designing the system around these semantic values, identifying we want to use the default type of text or the secondary type of text or this particular size of text without getting specific to the individual number or color, etc., so that as we start building out these relationships, we can go back and experiment with what if we changed this one color for all of these types of text or all of these types of backgrounds. And it allows us to be flexible so that we can change that value in one spot and see all those changes cascade throughout the system, which also mirrors the dev experience. When they're coding, they can make variable changes in one spot and see the entire system change. So from a production side, a production perspective, it helps designers get more into the mindset of a developer, codifying relationships beyond just specific instances and values.
That's great. Yes, I have seen projects done where things are not kind of spec'd out as far as, and it partly is driven by the type of project it is, the speed of the project, the budget, all that kind of stuff, where developers are coming into a Figma file and just sort of eyeballing things, like the placement of things, or what is the corner radii on that, or this sort of thing that looks like it's a repeatable component. Maybe I should just build this thing once and then have this thing that looks related. Everything goes in there. So they're starting to like kind of bleed over into the designer's role, basically, where designers should be kind of speccing out and documenting, like what we have here, the things that need to be, like, really, it helps the developer not have their cognitive burden of saying, oh no, now I have to come into this Figma file and figure out the spacing between components and what happens when things are expanded or collapsed, or what is this certain definition, and starting to give some basic, like a roadmap or groundwork for the way that this is kind of specced out with the, like you mentioned, the primitives and the semantics. So in the case of like, if we want to come in and, based on maybe feedback from MyEssentials, and they're like, oh, hey, we really want to change that font. We don't like it anymore. We want to update it based on this brand decision that comes from a marketing partner or something like that. We could just change it in one place and it will flow throughout the Figma file. We can then communicate that to the developer about what variable changed, and then they can make that change on their end as well. And it wouldn't have to be, changed in hundreds of places, for example.
And it would help them identify where exactly that change has to be made, because it's all captured in one spot versus having to identify across hundreds of potential pages and say, you're using it here. Is this the font we want to change versus is it okay in this spot? Are we using a different font here? It helps to kind of capture that repeatability, that scalability that allows us to move so quickly.
Right. So with this in mind, this documentation that we have for the base of the design system for MyEssentials, and then we go into, say, another user persona that may have some different needs, how will we capture maybe some customization that's needed for stores or consultants or anything else that needs to be it needs to live within the system, but then also maybe a little bit, not super customized, but flexible enough that we could, customize to certain pain points or needs that they have.
Yeah, the great value in this being variable based is that we can add another level of dimensionality where we can have all the same markers indicating we want to use this type of token here, but we can change essentially what those markers point to on the primitive side. So we can create a completely different style for customers versus internal staff and have it all point to the same places, but reference slightly different variables. Light mode versus dark mode is another application that we could do. And having all that setup work of connecting the entire system with logical semantic connections allows us to iterate very quickly on those different minor changes. Because again, it will cascade, but also preserve what was existing by having essentially another column of information to choose from.
So what you're saying is that it's truly scalable, basically, from the
Yes,
design side, and that it will support, now that we've made these definitions, wherever MyEssentials wants to go, we can meet them.
100%.
Yeah. And I showed them not this file, but the under the hood of the design system that was in progress on the other Figma file, and they were like, they loved it. It was just really cool to see that too. And all the, not even just to sideline it because I love it, is the design work that goes into the documentation itself is also really awesome in my opinion. So we're looking at the component level parts of the design system that build up some of the elements that were spec'd out from that other elements section that I was looking at before. This one is for cards, and the one to the left I had just been on was for form inputs and things like that that are controlled by certain variations that are needed. Like here, these are these entity card variants that relate to specific use cases that come up in the system itself. We want to see something that's a little more compressed. We want to see an instance where there is an icon showing a location. We want to see a card that's a little bit bigger showing something that relates to shipping. This is one that's for customers that is showing an account profile and a name. Things like that, that we take the base level of things that are defined. We're looking at like the white background and the corner
Mhm.
radii here and the, bold upper level heading text. And then we have, this column type. It's not really column. It's more like a label and then some text here defining what is defined right here, like expiration date, customer IDs, things like that. That within that, the information needs to be kind of remixed based on what's being shown to the user, based on the use cases for the system. So this is like kind of the next level of abstraction where you then have the components to solve for the specific flows and the functionality that's needed in the application.
100%. Yeah. We start with kind of the most basic elements of typography, color, spacing, borders, and stuff like that. And as soon as we start building actual interactable elements and consistent patterns within the website itself or the application itself, we can start mixing and matching those variables into predefined structures we call components so that they can be reused throughout the application without having to manually put them together. So it, again, speeds up our ability to iterate quickly and synchronize all of these elements throughout the different flows and pages we're creating so they all tie back to a single source of truth.
And that single source of truth is a living document,
Yeah,
which is what we're saying. Yeah. And that's partly what makes it so powerful, and the ability to scale is that it's the source of truth for the visual definition that we're making here, but it's all built on that hierarchy, that the things that are more complex are built on a structure that's defined lower down at the base level. And that's really what makes it so powerful, is that it's a living, growing part of
yeah.
the system itself, the software. Yeah.
Yeah, really,
So
the deeper you go, the more you can see change get reflected throughout the system. It just allows us so much control to really specify where we want to see things augmented or refined without having to needlessly jump through all the different design iterations and pages that are being built.
yeah. So it picks up efficiencies on all sides for everybody. It takes that not, everything everywhere all the time to being like a lot less intentionally when we want it.
Yeah, I think the most compelling thing about creating within a design system is it allows for designers and developers and people involved to really codify intent in their design and bake in intentional decisions that can cascade throughout all of the different elements of the project. So whereas you might be in other types of design programs, you might be designing for that particular page and having certain variations and logic for that one particular example. By designing with a design system, it helps us maintain a consistency throughout all the pages and maintain a consistent level of decision making throughout all these pages that might get lost when building on the fly, so to say.
Hmm. Right. So we get a chance to be really, like you mentioned, intentional. Like we get a chance to like really express creativity and invention where it really needs to happen instead of trying to keep track of things that are maybe just barely in control as far as like the organization of aspects that are redesigned more on the fly or whatever. This keeps it under an umbrella of logic and ideas. But then when there's something that comes up, if it's driven by a user, or it's driven by a stakeholder or something like that, where they're like, we have this one thing that we really need to figure out and we're not sure what to do. That's like music to our ears because it's like this expansion of creativity. We can come in and knowing the rules that we've established here, either leverage what we already have and riff on it a little or define more parameters within that add to the system and keep it expanding and growing. So the creativity is then more targeted, and you could say, I came up with this really great and exciting idea, and it still lives within the rules, the visual rules that we've defined, doesn't break anything, it doesn't set anybody back or create any debt.
Yeah. And the more that we get ideas coming from the client and from people on the team, the more it reinforces the logic that goes into this system. What does work versus what doesn't work. It really just strengthens the position of the resulting design system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're looking at the patterns section for the design system that are scoped around the variants related to the drawer. So this is the one we were first looking at for the design update. And then these are the other variations around that have to do with payments. Payments are represented here.
Mm-hmm.
Notes is still here. Notes are still here. And then we have, this is one that's the insured device is coming up to the top. And we can see the policy down here. And this is the opposite one where we see the policy at the top and we see the device right here. But notes go alongside, which is great because it still meets the need of the CSR who we've scoped for in this redesign to say, we know that you need notes, the ability to see notes and add notes as you go, perhaps related to the certain element that you're drilling into, the certain UI component level thing that we need to really like start to look at statuses or some details about the specific device right here, or if it's the policy level, same thing.
Yeah.
We can add notes as we go and then still have access to flip back and forth between either the device itself or the policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And patterns exist in the system as like the most top layer of composed design. It's bringing in all the elements that we've created this far and conveys a configuration of how these different components can combine together to create an actual interactable element of the website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is the component for the sidebar, left sidebar. This is customer actions that we were looking at, but these are perhaps some other user persona types that we would have related to. This is a location, so this is maybe a consultant. This is a policy. Like to understand a little bit more about how we may need to change or add information that's shown here based on a deeper understanding of those user personas and what they need now versus what they needed last year. But we basically have that all kind of documented and solved for initially with the design decisions we've already made for the left sidebar, which is right here in the CSR level for this particular component and pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking at the accordions. Tables or grids, I feel like they're interchangeable. This is an expandable component, but then within that we have the table or grid and a kind of grayed outside for horizontal scroll.
Yeah. Yeah, we through the iteration process, we realized we had essentially the same structure, this data table with a heading and some other properties that would exist both as a compartment of the actual screen itself and also as a integrated feature inside of the page itself. So two different levels of elevation when looking at the system. And rather than create two different components that didn't share the logic that we knew was there, we could build one component in two different states so that all of that decision making that affects one would affect both.
And here's the nav bar.
Yep. Some components are not that complex.
Yeah.
They're encapsulated in one page.
And you would never have either a website or software without a nav bar. You
Exactly.
have to have that.
And it's got to stay consistent too. So it's
right.
really important to have it be reusable in that way.
Yep. I like that you added it to patterns, because that makes sense to me, that it is not just a component, but that it's a pattern that repeats itself through and is present throughout the application. And, the sort of minimized version of this, the icons related to search, the filtered search on the first kind of landing page that, when we're looking at screen inventory, that was the first one that has this ability to be able to access searches related to these specific elements minus home. Everything else can be searched by these specific filterable elements, and that also persists along the left sidebar as a user goes through. So they have access to the things that they need at times that they want it, but it's also minimized so it's not in their face when they don't want to have to look at it.
Exactly.
And also just to say, like, at Troy Web so far, we have worked from style guides. We have not worked from a design system before. So there's some upfront efforts that go into architecting this. But I would say that, from my point of view, we've already observed Connor picking up efficiencies on the dev side, I feel like, with creating these components in dev level documentation to be able to put them into the new system as it's being built, which is really, really powerful. So not only will this save time pretty quickly for development, this is going to save time for development like pretty immediately in the medium term, and definitely in the future, slightly longer term. So when we've done style guides, it's more to say, here's a few colors, here's a few fonts, that's it. Or like maybe a brand logo. So we have like a reference point for like branding and stuff like that. But there isn't this level of, we talked about abstraction, hierarchy, and saying like, these are the pattern definitions. Here's when they appear. Here's what they relate to. So we're talking about not using a style guide, but defining more efforts around not just visualization of what happens, but future proofing the design so that it makes sense to a developer as developing the visuals. So if you want to say more about that, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think style guides are a great step towards efficiency and consistency. I think design systems are just the next level beyond that, where we really, like you said, start to capture behavior, user flows, how different systems relate to each other, more so than just a confined set of variables. Both have their purposes, and there's certainly a style guide to this system in a way. But as you build more complex products like we do at Troy Web, there just becomes a great use case for using design systems to capture some of that more complex logic. And it's really how you can build super efficient designs, products, software at scale. This is how the big boys do it, as they say. And the thing is that it's accessible. It's not something that should just be reserved for the largest enterprises. It's something that, with the right amount of attention and the right type of people involved, any size business can really benefit from codifying some of these design decisions and see real results based on how these things are set up.
Love that. Yeah. I just wanted to, before we wind down here, I wanted to open the variables panel to show a little bit more beyond the visuals that we were kind of going through in the Figma file itself, but also to get into the logic of the specific abstraction level kind of rules that we were talking about
Yeah.
and that you set up. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. When like we were talking before, thinking about how we customize for different variations or different applications within this predefined structure of our variables and components and relationships, the density, for example, is a good way for us to capture how many of these variables are going to be the same for how we define our buttons or how we define our badges, but we just want those specific variables associated with that property to change based on if it's a really compact button versus a larger button. So it allows us that flexibility to say we want to have buttons that follow a certain type of structure. They have these certain type of properties, but we are going to have variations on them throughout the system that aren't requiring a full new design per se. They really just need some augmented properties in specific use cases. And having a variable system like this set up with individual columns to represent each of those states makes that job just really simple. And a bit easier on the performance of the program that we're using to design this as well. Rather than creating an artboard full of all these different button variations and colors and scopes, we can simplify that a bit for what logic is shared between those different states and just highlight the things that do have to change. And when we go to prototyping, for example, with the drawer example that we showed, there are a number of properties that we want to change how they are presented, whether the drawer is displaying information or allowing the user to edit that information. So this also allows us a way to prototype more efficiently by capturing what those changes are between those two states without having to redesign additional components or additional variants of these designs, creating more bloat. This allows us to really play with those variables without adding extra complexity or extra tech debt in a way. And what's interesting, it adds a level of dimensionality where we can affect multiple normally disconnected components that unify along a consistent state. So for example, when you're editing in the drawer, the entire drawer doesn't have to change. Some of the individual components can change just because they are aware that we're in this editing state. So we don't have to create these large components that house a lot of nested individual elements that the entire thing has to change. We can control a little bit more uniformly how individual components change at that level.
We're using Figma to leverage some of that logic based on the components, the parts that we want to be able to switch out and change and turn on and off related to the things that need to happen based on maybe that pattern or that use case or anything like that. So that I'm saying it that way because it's a new idea for us to say, let's use more of the tools that Figma offers to organize some of the things that we can see visually and have it a little bit more behind the scenes because it's not right out in front of on the artboard. Maybe not annotated out every little detail, even though if it's present in the documentation. But we're also putting it into these variables as documentation to be able to have that switchability to move between aspects of, in this case, the drawer that we want to be able to use. But this is leveraging more of what Figma has to offer to let us do that level of organization that takes it to the next level for the design and therefore the design system. So it's taking the abstraction of the visual elements and the flows as defined to say, here's when this happens, here's when it doesn't happen. And you can make that interchangeable. But all of this, and I'm saying it this way because somebody asked you this recently, which is like, where did all this come from? This was all defined by us.
Yeah.
And by you. in the work. But once it's done, we can build on it, change it, add another column if there's another thing to do here related to the drawer. And I don't know what that would be just yet, but something else. Once the base is in there, we can add to it. But this lets us make those higher level definitions of what happens based on a component now that we understand, going from the beginning to the end of like, what are the users' pain? What can we do about it? What are some of our design ideas around that? Start to, do our like wireframing or kind of medium level wireframing and visualization around that. Then we start to get to an understanding of what's feeling good and what they're liking and what makes sense to us, get that feedback, feeling good, it's in a good state. Then we start to make the definition of, like really codifying those components as designed and saying, this is when and why they're used. This is when we see this and when we don't, and that kind of thing. So that's what we're looking at is like even more under the hood of the visualization that we're seeing in the Figma artboard. We're seeing more of the actual perhaps dev driven logic about it, but this is the design driven logic. It's the design, it's like the systems thinking kind of logic behind it.
Yeah. To get a bit meta for a second, I think there's a perspective that designers are just brought in to make things look pretty, to make things look consistent. And designers really are problem solvers. They really want to understand deeply how users are affected by design decisions. And designers are thinking about how their design is going to impact behavior. And through this process of building a design system and all the features that it enables, it allows designers to contribute more to this process of building a product than otherwise they'd be able to. And what's great is it helps create visibility for our clients to see all that designers are bringing to the table as well.
Exactly. Well, anything else that you want to add before we hop off? That was a lot. We covered a lot.
Yeah, no, this is great. If anything, I would say, as the designs build upon themselves, there's even more opportunity for this system to keep growing and keep expanding. As we've reviewed the components, I'm noticing, oh, we could do even more things here and there. So it really is a living, breathing document that will continue to expand and refine itself the more we invest time and energy into it. And I think the willingness on the customer's behalf to get started in this project or this type of effort for their company is going to see some really impressive returns when they get.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And I'm looking forward to the next level of when we start, and Josh has mentioned this to me a couple times too, of getting into the logic of plans and policies and things like that. And we start to think a little bit more about some of these other personas and user flows that are needed, that maybe we don't need to actually design the sort of the dashboard views for, but we can come into and say, now we know a little bit more about this one. And so we need to tweak blah, blah, blah here to meet those needs, or this one, same thing. And then, we can build off the base we've established here without having to reopen a brand new design budget. So that's when the efficiencies are really going to start to pick up. And that's like so exciting and cool. But yeah, I echo everything you said. It's really powerful. I love seeing the enthusiasm from the users, from the stakeholders, and very much so from the developer side. It means a lot to me because this project always had, it needed a designer's love, and I feel like it finally got it.
Well, I'm happy to provide it. It's a fun project and a fun challenge to take on. So I was really excited to get involved in this.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jake. This has been great, and excited to see how the recording will turn out.
Awesome. Me too. Thanks, Ashley.